Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan Shaughnessy, Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at the National Gallery of Canada. I'm here at the National Gallery on the unceded traditional territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. On this week's House Blend, I'm going to be speaking with Francis Julien, who works in the Chief Curator's office at the National Gallery, about a new, very exciting promised gift to the collection, Frank Bolling's Middle Passage, a painting from 1970. I look forward to our discussion about Francis's work at the gallery and about this wonderful painting that recently has become part of the National Collection. It's okay. I was just going to say that, no, Francis, a pleasure to have you. Welcome to House Blend.
Pleasure to be here.
You're actually part of the relaunch of House Blend. This was an initiative that the gallery started at the start of the pandemic last year to bring the voices of the gallery into dialogue online and platforms that we really weren't so present on, but were forced to be during our moment of lockdown and not being at the gallery. So now we find a sort of a new relaunch of House Blend on YouTube from Instagram Live, and we're starting, and we're going to do some of the things we've always done, which is connect with artists with the Canadian art world, and also those in and around the institution. And in your case, Francis, we're really introducing another face behind the gallery, bring to our public a bit more of an understanding of who it is that makes the National Gallery of Canada run. And so, Francis, I thought on that note, maybe we could just start. I met you a few years ago. You were working in the Visitor Services Department of the gallery at the time. But could you tell everyone where you are now and what you do at the gallery?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start at the start. I joined the gallery in 2013, working at the bookstore, it was called at the time. And so technically then I wasn't a gallery employee, but yeah, working in the building, I spent about a year and a half working in the bookstore. Eventually I got a job with Visitor Services as a Visitor Services associate. Did that for about a year. Did 6 months in the membership office, then went back to Visitor Services as the office administrator. Did that for about 4 years, and recently was hired into the Chief Curator's office as Kitty Scott's executive assistant.
Right. So that's where, and you know, I'm getting to know you much better now, and spending a lot more time with you now that you're working with Kitty and in the Chief Curator's department. And I think it's a busy place to be at the gallery, possibly.
Very busy, yes. It's very busy. It's nonstop. Definitely a change of pace from Visitor Services, but you know, the front line and the curatorial team, they both sort of have their own interesting set of challenges. You know, working on the front line, you know, visitors are top of mind, and so the day-to-day stuff is what keeps you busy for the most part, and you sort of develop sort of an almost intimate connection with the public and what they go through and how they experience the gallery. And so to experience that for close to 7 years before finally joining the curatorial team, it sort of gave me an interesting perspective. And now to see all of the work that goes into bringing works into the collection and the acquisitions process, that's just a whole new ball game, really. It's so yeah. I've been lucky to have different opportunities working at the gallery.
We recently at the gallery installed a very important work of art, a major large-scale painting in arguably one of the most famous galleries are in the National Gallery. This we know it by number, C214. Mm-hmm. A lot of people might know it as the Voice of Fire room because it is the room that Barnett Newman's Voice of Fire has been installed in since the gallery opened in the late 1980s.
It's a very iconic and storied room.
A storied room. We know about, for various reasons. Also, if people only know that there was a large controversy about the Voice of Fire when it was acquired and want to come and see this work that is really an icon of American modernist abstract painting, post-war painting. And within this room that has stood relatively static with its Barnett Newmans, we're going to get there, Clifford Steele, Jackson Pollock. We have Agnes Martin is often in this gallery. The gallery's recently installed a work by Frank Bowling, and it's a major canvas from 1970 called Middle Passage. And it's an extraordinary painting, and it's coming to the gallery as a very generous promise gift from a collector in Winnipeg who really had he acquired it, and the generosity to bring it in as a proposed promise gift to the National Collection, Michael Nesbitt in Winnipeg. And so this work we installed in the context of the gallery we were just mentioning. Frank Bowling is an artist still living, born in what was then British Guyana, moves to the UK from what was then a British colony to, as he called it, the center of the world in London, to become an artist, really, I think from the get-go, to really paint and have a dialogue with what was then the most advanced and progressive dialogues around contemporary art. And from London, where he gained some recognition, moves to the United States in 1967, and at that time embarks on a series of paintings called map paintings, of which Middle Passage is really a fine example. And we're here to talk about it today because when we were installing the piece, you came up to see it, and I think had an experience, as we hope and imagine many viewers would, coming to the gallery from the public, that it was something you couldn't get away from this work, it seemed, after you'd seen it, so much so that you wrote an article about it for the NGC magazine. So, Francis, I've talked a lot, but maybe you could walk us through your coming to this fantastic work in the collection.
Kitty, the chief curator, just happened to mention the Frank Bowling piece is being installed. Jonathan's up there with the technicians. Do you want to come see it? And I said, yeah, of course. So we walked up to C214, and on the way there, Kitty mentioned this will be the first work by a black artist displayed in C214. And that was sort of the first moment that I realized, this is, I'm about to see something pretty significant, especially as a person of color. And we walked into the space, and the technicians installing it they still had their measuring tapes out. They sort of shifted it a little bit, and then they turned to look at us and said, "This is about where it's going to be hanging." And so, we sort of started a conversation between the three of us, you, Kitty, and I. And just hearing the two of you speak about the work, at first what really draws you in is the colors. So you immediately notice the yellows and the reds. They're very bold, and so they draw you in right away. And then as you get closer and you really start to examine the painting, you see that it's not 100% abstract. You'll start to see geographical outlines of the continents of South America, Africa, and then you start to see these figures, these black figures. Some of them are older, some of them are younger, and thinking about what starts to pop out of the painting at the viewer, and thinking about the title of the work, Middle Passage. It's a reference to the transatlantic slave trade. And so it starts off as a very sort of like a loud, vibrant call to the viewer, and then it sort of coaxes you into thinking about what you're seeing, what's being represented, and the first time you look at it, you sort of go through this emotional process of just thinking about what was the artist thinking? Was he deliberately trying to, make a statement about black culture and what led to it? Or because it's sort of a mix of photo transfers and abstract painting, is he sort of inviting the viewer to draw their own conclusions and tell their own story? And so it was very, it was a very moving moment for me. And so I decided to come back and see it again with my fiance. And that second time, just talking through what I had gone through the first time with her, it sort of struck me again how significant this painting was and the impact that it had on me. And so I shared this story with another one of our colleagues, and she said, you should write an article about your experience. And so one thing led to another. I wrote the article, and here we are today. There's a lot of parallels that you can draw between what Frank Bowling did and the actual painting. So I'll start with, to go back to, you said he left the UK and moved to Manhattan in the late 60s because he was sort of pigeonholed as a black artist. He didn't want that to be what he was, just a black artist. You get the sense that he has a unique identity. It's a complex identity. He's got his own story, and just to be reduced to a black artist is it's very discouraging. And yet he's moving to Manhattan in the late 60s, the height of the civil rights movement, and the civil rights movement was representative of black culture wanting to not be reduced to just black people. There's a whole story behind it. It's complex. It's sometimes chaotic. And then the painting itself, I think, is I sort of saw it as a metaphor for black culture, a metaphor for the way that I experienced the painting, and also a metaphor for just me as a person since I was a child discovering my own identity. Mm-hmm. And so there's some interesting parallels to draw there. Like you said, it pulls you in because of the color, and so if you look at Black history, it tends to be very rich, very vibrant. There's I'm going to get into stereotypes here, but there's the spicy food, there's the music that wants to make you dance, there's the colorful ways to dress, there's the different hairstyles. And so it's very, it presents itself as very interesting, and you see it, you can't really ignore it. You want, you sort of want to learn more, and so it draws you in. And then when you really start to study it and look at it more closely, that's when you start to see the troubled history and the complex development that led to everything that's here today.
And, I think, you bring up color in that way, and I think you can't get around that there's an audacity to the color. I think at the time, right, 1970, and it's bold, and I think that's also making a form of painting statement. I mean, there's definitely, this is going into, I think it captures, it sounds like maybe what you're saying too, is that it's able to capture a range of emotion. I mean, when you look at that, there's nothing passive, whether that's positive or negative, whether it's celebratory or violent, the colors express. And I think that's something that really, really, and we talked also about, one of the big things about certain paintings from that time, certainly you get that in a painting like The Voice of Fire, is this desire for the artist to have you look at the colors and then the after image will start to make shifts happen, or you look at the wall and something else is going to pop out. And I think, interestingly, you can get that in this painting. And but what you're going to see is, yes, possibly an after image that might include a figure, for example, which would be very different than what you might experience with some of the other works in that room, which is saying something. And I think it also should be noted, because we're talking about this, that we're also in the space of the gallery it's in at the National Gallery. is a room that's been devoted, as I said, to post-war American painting since the gallery opened. A dominant, let's say, canon and narrative within art history, which is being looked at and reconsidered. And what I find really interesting about that act is, and the attention that's on an artist such as Frank Bowling, even in the last probably 5 to 10 years, with the help also of the major retrospective that just happened, is that it's not as though he was hiding anywhere. You know, the work has been there, and he was and is, but certainly at the time of this painting, was tremendously active in New York, not only as a painter, but as a writer. He wrote quite prolifically about various subjects, but also as a curator, working a lot with the promotion of African American artists, with black artists at the time, within the general context of art of the moment. And so it's interesting to me that, you know, what happens in the intervening time where the histories that build up around that, certain figures don't get so much attention as you move forward. And museums, in collecting, in showing, in creating and perpetuating these kinds of histories and art histories, are often, and I think we've seen that over the last year, certainly the last half a year, have been rightly pointed to say, well, you know, when we're talking about subjects of white supremacy, when we're talking about subjects of what's dominant and what's not, museums have a fair piece to account for and a role to play in those histories. And so I think that this is also a part, and Francis, I'd be curious from your perspective too, in terms of, you know, the National Gallery is also a place looking at what does that mean here and what's happened in the collection that we have. And so you talked about coming into that room and seeing this work by Frank Bowling, and it is a piece I would call transformative in the sense of what does it do. It's a fantastic work, and what is it allowing, or what does it say within the space of the context of the gallery and the narratives and the canons, in fact, that the museum like this one is telling to the public?
It's a work that really captures what needs to be captured in this moment, I think, because of the complexity. You know, it's obvious that you know, the gallery wasn't just trying to slide this work into a room. You know, it's like you said, it's bold. It makes a statement. It's not hiding. You know, you walk into the room and it says, "Hey, come see me." You know, and so yeah, I think it's a fantastic piece for the time that we're in right now, and. Yeah, the conversations that are happening around the gallery and inside the gallery, you know, there's that re-examining of what the identity of the gallery is and the role that it's played so far in a colonialist society. I think there's some important steps happening right now, and it's nice to be a part of.
Francis, I want to thank you for joining us on House Blend today and sharing some thoughts on this work of art, also what you do at the gallery. And for more, people can look up on NGC Magazine the article that you've recently written about Frank Bowling and the work Middle Passage.
I hope Middle Passage has as much of an impact on our visitors as it did myself. And thank you for the work that you did bringing it into the collection. Thanks to the donor as well. It's I think it's a fantastic piece, and hopefully it'll be on display for years to come.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Thanks, Francis.
Thank you.